University. The mostly student crowd barged through a security fence and through the lecture, screaming at the PM about his unpopular policies on asylum seekers, student fees, gay marriage and job losses. To have a look at this and more, we're joined now by Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull and Deputy Opposition Leader Turnbull Plibersek. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Malcolm, if I can start with you, 100 or so days on from releasing the budget, there's certainly a lot that those protesters are unhappy about.
Well, so it seems, but the bulk of the budget has been passed already. There are some issues that are, we're still debating with the crossbenchers, but that is situation normal. As Tanya knows, governments rarely have a majority in the Senate, and so you have to negotiate with the people with the swing votes, and in that case that's the 8 independent senators.
Tanya, 50 police were called in. One protester was injured in the ruckus. We know that there's a lot of opposition to the Abbott government policies, but are protesters starting to go too far?
Well, I think it's interesting that Malcolm's changed the rhetoric now. A few weeks ago it was budget emergency and we had Joe Hockey and Tony Abbott out there saying disaster, disaster. Now the government's realised that they've gone too far in talking about a budget emergency and they're dialling back the rhetoric. It's been a very noticeable change in their talking points. When it comes to these students, I don't think protests should ever turn violent, but I think that every Australian has a right to tell their government how they feel about a budget that breaks promises. There was no cuts to health, no cuts to education, no change to pensions, no new taxes, all those promises broken. And these uni students are really going to feel the brunt of it. They're looking at much more expensive degrees. And of course they're worried about that. They're worried about having to choose between buying a house when they grow up and actually paying off their university debt. It's a terrible thing in Australia. It's a very American-style university system and Australians have rejected it. And not just uni students have rejected it, but all Australians have rejected that move away from the fairer system that we've always had.
Do those broken promises sit comfortably with you, Malcolm?
Well, I don't concede we've broken any promises at all, but I guess,
if you say...
Yeah.
Come on.
No.
I mean, there's a laundry list there that Tanya just read out.
Yeah, well, it's a very long list to be a long program. Let me just get back to the point about university fees, though, to be fair. When I went to university fees were free. University was free. And it was actually a Labor government that reintroduced fees and introduced HECS because it recognised that it was unfair to ask the whole population, most of whom had not gone to university, to pay taxes to send people to university so they could go out and get jobs and earn much higher incomes than they would without a university degree. So it is fair for people to pay for their university degrees.
A small portion, Malcolm, but not an unaffordable amount.
Well, the reality is that students will be able to borrow the entire amount of the fees, at the best rate they'll ever be able to get, and they will have significantly higher income in their lives.
So they should pay more tax. They will pay more tax throughout their lives.
They will have significantly higher income, and as a consequence of that degree, and you see, this is the critical thing. I mean, for a Labor Party, the Labor Party is, claims to be on behalf of the battler and the working man and woman and so forth.
And I know I could never afford to have gone to university if what your government is proposing was true. I couldn't afford it.
I think that's...
My dad was a plumber and my mum was a housewife. I would never have got to university under your scheme.
Tanya, that's not true, because you would have been able to, obviously contribute to your fees by your own work, which all students did. I certainly did.
I did that
I
too.
worked when I was at university, but I was in the days when I didn't have
fees. I did that to support myself.
But you would also be able to borrow the money from the government at a very low rate, and that is something you'd be... Well, don't sniff. I mean, we borrow money for everything.
But Malcolm, working class kids aren't going to go into $200,000 worth of debt knowing that means they'll never be able to buy a home of their own.
But that doesn't mean... That's not
Malcolm,
true.
Listen, if you're talking about a nurse, or a teacher, you're looking at a 15 years worth of repayment. If you're talking about a woman studying engineering, you're talking about 18 years worth of university fee repayment. Would you take on, as an 18-year-old student, almost 20 years' worth of debt, not even knowing that you've got a job at the end of that study. Would you do that?
Well, Tanya, these figures are wildly exaggerated.
No, they're not.
But
the
fact is that the
National Tertiary Education
repayment of
figures.
the student loans, I mean, and this is the case today. I mean, students are taking on debt today, and the fee help they're paying. You know, so there's, you know, this is all that the reforms are doing is giving the universities greater flexibility in setting their fees, and some universities may set lower fees to compete. Some universities will raise...
Who's going to do that?
Well, universities that want to compete for students. I mean, can I tell you...
Except you're cutting their funding. So you're cutting funding by 20%. So they have to make up 20% just to be back at stage one.
We're going to have to leave it there. We've got to move on because a big story yesterday, we saw that Victoria Police will not pursue rape charges against opposition leader Bill Shorten, saying they don't have enough evidence to secure a conviction, and Mr Shorten came forward to address the story yesterday.
I fully cooperated to clear my name, and that is what I've done. I freely answered all the questions that the police asked of me. The police have now concluded the investigation. The decision speaks for itself. It is over.
Bill Shorten yesterday. Now, Tanya, for most people, I think the fact that these allegations even existed came as a surprise. We know that it's been circulating a bit on social media. These allegations emerged around the time that Bill Shorten became opposition leader. Can you give us some idea of how much concern there has been over the last 10 or 11 months over these allegations?
Look, I think the first and most important thing to say is when allegations like this are made, it's absolutely vital that the person making the allegation goes to the police and that the issue is thoroughly investigated. And a few months ago when this was first in the newspapers, an unnamed person was being investigated. I was asked about it at the time and I said, the police have to investigate. It's an incredibly serious allegation. We take these allegations seriously as a society. That means the police must investigate. But having had all these months to undertake their investigation, I think with the investigation concluded, Bill thought, well, I've got to now face this front on, and I think that that's a pretty gutsy thing to do, given that he hadn't been named in the media. He wanted to take it head on and say, cooperated with the police, they've found I have no case to answer, we now should be able to draw a line under it. It's been an incredibly stressful period, I think, for him and for his family. And no doubt everyone involved in this, it's been very stressful. But having been investigated, having had his name cleared, I think it is good now that he can draw a line under it.
Malcolm, as a young lawyer working for Kerry Packer, you defended him during the time of Costigan. Do you feel sorry? And that, obviously those allegations were proved untrue. Do you feel sorry for Bill Shorten right now?
Well, look, I guess, let me say this. I think Bill Shorten made the right decision to come out and say he was the person being talked about. And you remember Kerry Packer did the same thing because the allegations that were being made against him were about the Goanna, a sort of a pseudonym. But everyone was talking and saying it was Kerry. I think you've got to nail these things. Look, there is nothing more. Well, I suppose there are plenty of things, but it is very, very painful to be to feel that you are the subject of an unjust accusation, particularly a very serious one like that. Look, I think Shorten's done the right thing. The police. It is very important that allegations of this kind are taken seriously, and the police have to investigate them, go through their process, and they've come to a conclusion that they don't want to take it any further. And Shorten has said, yes, well, that was me, and that's it. Now, what the complainant says now, I don't know, but I think from Shorten's point of view, he's better off getting this whole thing aired and ventilated and dealt with now, rather than it continuing to bubble up as a whispering campaign, which can, those things can be very corrosive.
Indeed. OK, Malcolm and Tanya, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lisa.
Hope you both have a great weekend.
You too.